Hi, this is my dad's Felder KFS36 table saw. It's a table saw, shaper, and slot mortise combination, and it was a brand new design when my dad bought it back in 1986. They hadn't fully optimized that design yet at the time, so it's got a few awkward things. So I'll go through and show you how this saw works and what's awkward. The table saw controls are on this side, and by loosening this locking thing and this knob here, you can then change the angle on the saw. It's quite hard to operate this lever, so not as elegant as a turn knob that you can just adjust the angle with. And the depth of cut is adjusted by turning this. There used to be a plastic handle that you could plug onto here, but that broke shortly after my dad got the saw, so he made this handle for it, which is made out of wood. At some point he accidentally threw it in the wood stove, fished it back out before it was burnt up, so it's a little bit burnt. So that goes on here, and then turn that to raise the blade. It's a bit hard to turn. The rip fence attaches to this dovetail that goes all the way around the saw, and the fence just hooks onto here, and then you have to tighten this by quite a few turns to get it to lock. It's a bit of an odd fence. It also has the ability to adjust the angle of the fence, and that's not that useful for a table saw, but this fence was also their jointer fence, so that's why you can set the angle on it. It's a bit of an awkward to adjust fence, to just adjust it by a little bit. You kind of have to bump it a little bit, and it's very stubborn, and it's not terribly stiff, so I'm not terribly fond of this fence. The other thing that's annoying about this fence is if you want to move it close to the blade, it interferes with the sled. So moving it like this, you can only get it this far, and then it hits on here. So to get it to here, for instance, now you hit the sled. And that actually, you wouldn't think this would happen very often, but to me this happens quite a lot. Because you might have something set off, and then you just want to square the end off with another piece. So you want to use the sled without moving the fence. So you can see the camera shake a little bit in the last shot. Part of that is because this saw is freaking heavy. I'm also using a cheap tripod with a heavy camera on a wooden floor. But this saw, the base of it is actually made out of concrete, and the saw altogether probably weighs about a ton. The saw has a sliding table, and this is sort of an in-between of the small rectangular sliding tables of the 1970s and the really long format style sliding tables of today. It's got quite a range of motion, but not really enough for making it usable for rip cuts. So it goes from about here back to here. The crosscut fence that came with this saw is kind of a dumb design. So you put it on there with this pin here, and then you put that on here, and attach the locking knob down here. And then you have to manually set this thing to a 90-degree angle every time. There used to be a scale that went on here, but it's not really accurate enough, so it's kind of dumb to not have a reliable cross-cutting thing. So my dad never actually ended up using this fence very much at all. Instead, he came up with something homemade. So this is what my dad came up with, which is essentially some big iron parts bolted together, and that locks on here, and then this adjusts like so. And this is not at all adjustable. For non-90-degree cuts, you can always use the other fence, but this fence being not adjustable, it's always square at 90 degrees. Now this table is a little bit narrow for making cross cuts, but this is where a really clever Felder sort of thing comes in, because there's these extension tables that can be clamped to these dovetails that go around the saw. So by clamping one of these on here, you now have a reasonable width for making crosscuts. So the shaper controls for the saw are just like the table saw controls, and they're on the back of the saw. And to turn the saw into a shaper, you lower the blade all the way, and you open this here, and we drop in the spindle. Now we're going to switch this to shaper mode. Now we rewired the saw actually so that this is shaper, whereas this says it's shaper here. The reason for that is by putting it here we can run the shaper backwards, which in the regular configuration the slot mortiser and the planer would be the same motor, and that motor can run both directions. So we put it on the mortiser mode now, and then we can start the machine up. Back when they made the saw, they weren't required to have any sort of electronic brake on the saw, so the tools really take a long time to spin down. For example, in saw mode, the blade spins for a really long time. Not terribly safe. I usually end up running out of patience and stopping it by ramming a piece of wood against the blade. So back to the shaper. This thing here is for holding down the stock. So I've never actually personally used the shaper on this saw. I don't really like things with molding very much, and with a shaper this big you can't just run a little workpiece through to show it. So I'm just going to take this apart again. So this is one of the coolest features about this machine, which is how you cut tenons with it. So this machine will cut tenons in one pass, and because both cutter heads are mounted to the same shaft, it cuts them very consistently. Now this machine can cut various tenons that you can't really cut on a table saw with a tenon jig. For instance, this one is asymmetrical and it's got a bevel on one side. This one's got a bevel just on one side to be part of a door. And this one again is asymmetrical. And the way some of these are cut, especially some of the really long ones, is using these really big cutter heads. And these cutter heads have replaceable blade thingies, so you can put different ones in there for different widths of cut and different bevels. And finally on the left side is the slot mortiser, and it's just an XY table that can move up and down. And originally this lever was too likely to hit this table here, so down here we changed the pivot to be further this way so that this end of the lever isn't going to hit the table. And the cutter, the chuck is mounted directly onto the motor, so it always spins at 3,500 RPM. So it cuts cleaner than a hollow chisel mortiser. Not quite as clean as fast as a router, but it is able to cut much deeper than a router is able to cut. So that's the Felder KFS36 from 1986. I should add that Felder table saws have evolved quite a lot in the last 25 years.